What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel. Thanks so much for tuning in. We are here, which means we have fights upcoming this weekend, and it is an amazing pay-per-view. Yes, it's going to cost you money, but cry about it later because it's going to be well worth every single dollar you spend. We are talking about UFC 243 live in Australia. Aussie, Aussie, Aussie! Oi, oi. Oi, you got it. Aussie, Aussie, Aussie! Anyways, guys, first and foremost, we have an amazing fight that unfortunately was pulled off the card. We had a match between Holly Holm and Raquel Pennington, but unfortunately, that got niched. So we're going to start it off right in the middle of the main event. We're talking about four big fights. The first one we're going to talk about is Luke Jumeau going up against Dhiego Lima. Now, we're talking about both well-versed mixed martial artists. Dhiego Lima obviously is more tenured in the UFC. Both well-versed in jiu-jitsu, purple belt with Luke Jumeau and a brown belt with Dhiego Lima. Both incredible athletes, but right away, the difference is their resumes. Jumeau only having 3 fights in the UFC, a win, a loss, and a win against 3 fighters that no disrespect to them, and they might have a really bright future ahead of you, but if I told 9, 10 people out of 10 who are UFC fans, they're not going to really recollect who these fighters are. Whereas Dhiego Lima, his last 2 fights were victories, mind you, and they were against Court McGee via decision and Chad Laprise via devastating knockout. Dhiego Lima is a well-versed mixed martial artist, and he has a tremendous camp, and he trains with one of the best 170ers on the planet. Ironically, his brother, Douglas Lima, the future champ and previous champ of Bellator. But before that, he strung losses against top contenders, Yushin Okami, Jesse Taylor, Li Jinliang, and Tim Means. That's going to be a huge factor in this fight, because I do think that Luke Jumeau is still brand new to this, especially never fighting a really household name in the UFC, where that's pretty much all that Lima has been fighting his whole UFC career, even though some of those coming up short. But I think he's really matured, especially in his last 2 fights, fighting those big contenders. Luke Jumeau, when you see his striking, he loves to throw those looping hooks. And for me, Dhiego Lima is a far more sophisticated stand-up striker. He's more linear in his techniques. Like I said, training with the best in Douglas Lima, and I think that's going to play a huge factor here. I think Dhiego Lima should weather that storm, because I believe the storm is coming for Jumeau. He's going to be so excited. He's going to go out there and try to get the knockout win, especially with those big looping punches. But Jumeau, he does fatigue quite easily. If Dhiego Lima doesn't really want to engage, is scared of his striking, scared of getting knocked out, whatever the case may be, I say really tire him out. Make him chase you for the first 5 minutes. Then in that second round, when he gets fatigued, set your striking up to get inside, take him to the ground and pound him, and maybe loosen him up for a submission. And if I'm going to have to call this fight, I do think it's going to be a submission for Dhiego Lima. And I think Dhiego is going to get the submission in round 2. Now we're going to go up to the heavyweight division, where we have Homelander Tai Tuvasa going to get up against heavyweight slugger Sergey Spivak. Now, Tai Tuvasa has had 5 fights at the UFC, his first 2 coming via devastating knockout in favor of Tai Tuvasa, and since then has piled up numerous wins, especially his last win coming against top contender in Andre Arlovsky, and of course, side note, previous champion. Since then, he came up short against the very, very tough Junior Dos Santos, and of course, in his last, coming up short in a decision against Blagoy Ivanov. But he is ready to make his mark. He is ready to get back into the win column, and I think Sergey, especially being kind of new to the UFC, and especially since his last loss is coming via devastating knockout against Walt Harris, I think Spivak is going to be a little hesitant in his engagement here, especially going up against a very, very tough slugger in Tai Tuvasa. Tai Tuvasa can eat a shot better than most. Even the heavy hands of Junior Dos Santos couldn't put him to sleep. A TKO, different than a KO. Hope you understand. I do think that the home crown advantage here of Tai Tuvasa and the undeniable pressure that he is going to put on Sergey is going to be too much for Sergey to handle. He is just going to swarm him, press him against the cage. You don't want to make this a long fight, a point sparring fight, which honestly no Aussie knows how to do. That's a compliment, by the way, because you guys are all fighters. He's going to get in there, close that gap, put him against the cage, and just make Sergey really regret being in the octagon, at least that day anyways. This one is going to be short but sweet. It's going to be a first rounder for sure. At least that's what I think. I just think Sergey is going to be a little hesitant, maybe self-doubting. Usually that's what happens when somebody comes off their fresh loss, especially something as devastating as what he succumbed against Walt Harris, where the loss that Tai Tuvasa succumbed was kind of a closely knit decision against Blagoy. Now, I do think he's going to get back into that win column and very aggressively do so. He's going to come in there with that Aussie rage, and he is going to take the head clean off of Sergey in the first round. Next up is, in my opinion, if I were to bet money, I'd just promise to be the fight of the night. We have the Raging Bull Al Iaquinta, a slugger, going up against Aussie's own Dan Hooker. Dan Hooker, phenomenal kickboxer. Al Iaquinta, phenomenal stand-up fighter, but people are forgetting that he is a phenomenal ground fighter. Fighting under the Gracies, under, of course, his coach, Matt Serra. He is super tough, and the one thing about Al Iaquinta, he is literally always fighting the best of the best. His last 3 fights, Donald Cerrone, a loss, a previous WEC champion. Before that, a victory against Kevin Lee, top contender, in my opinion, future champion. And before that, arguably the greatest lightweight in the world, arguably the greatest fighter ever on the planet, Dagestan's own and my own, Khabib Nurmagomedov. This guy has the heart of a lion, and he did prove that in his fight against Khabib. Khabib has manhandled tons of fighters, all of his opponents. And Al Iaquinta, even though he one-sidedly beat him, Al Iaquinta succumbed no damage whatsoever and was still very much in it. If there was another 3 rounds, Al Iaquinta would surely still be in the fight and still standing and still trying to exchange with Khabib and not show any frustration whatsoever. Dan Hooker has his hands full. Although Dan Hooker is no slouch to this game as well, always fighting top contenders, his last being a very, very impressive victory over James Bick, but before that falling short with a devastating knee to the body from, of course, one of the best kickers in the game, probably the best kicker in the game currently, Edson Barbosa. Raging Al Iaquinta is always used to the boos, always used to the crowd against him, so he is not going to care being on home soil where Dan Hooker's going to basically take that in. The Aussie fans are going to be going nuts for him, push him to really take Al Iaquinta's head off, and in my opinion, not successfully doing so. And Al Iaquinta and Dan Hooker are just going to go at it and put on a tremendous show. I think Al Iaquinta is going to get back in the win column here. I don't think home turf advantage for Dan Hooker is going to play in the mind of Al Iaquinta at all, and Al Iaquinta is going to take this into the later rounds, push the pace, and actually, in fact, take it to decision. I'm really, really hoping that's what it is. Who knows? And if it could happen, it is the fight game, but let's pray for the best. Now, the main event is a title fight. A unification of title fights, mind you. We have the return of Israel Adesanya, the interim middleweight champion of the world, going up against home turf, home favorite, pretty much the king of Australian mixed martial arts. We are talking about Robert Whittaker. Robert Whittaker hasn't fought in over a year. He was slated to fight Kelvin Gastelum previously in Australia, but he had to pull out because of an injury. Now, Israel Adesanya has been talking a big game here, and I don't think it's rightfully so either, because based off his performance to Kelvin Gastelum, which was amazing, by the way, but I just think that Kelvin Gastelum landed far more shots and controlled the fight a lot more than I thought he would because of the styles. I found that Kelvin Gastelum was a little more sloppy and yet was able to find targets on Israel Adesanya. I think Robert Whittaker is way more aggressive and a lot better on his feet than Kelvin Gastelum is. And if he can find an opening, I don't think it'll be a second chance for Israel Adesanya if he wears her on the chin. I think it could very much be a night-night for him, as Robbie Whittaker, in my opinion, has probably one of the hardest hands, if not the hardest hands, at the 185 probably ever. The thing with Robert Whittaker is Robert Whittaker needs this fight. First of all, obviously in front of his fans, but he needs to prove that he is the champion, because he was basically given the belt off of, semantics, mind you. Michael Bisping fought GSP. GSP won the belt from Michael Bisping while the interim champ was Robert Whittaker. GSP decided to retire, so of course he had to relinquish the title, and now naturally the champion became Robert Whittaker. So Robert Whittaker has a fire under his ass, and he does have plenty to prove here. I do think, well, it goes without saying that the hometown guy will win for sure, because they're both fighting out of the same place. So I do think, though, I think I have to give this to Robert Whittaker. I think he is going to prove too much for Israel Adesanya. I think he's going to be ready for Israel Adesanya's fancy kicks and his cockiness and his stylistic approach to fighting. I just think that Robert Whittaker is one of those fighters that doesn't let his emotion get the best of him. He's a lot more calm and tenured at the top of the food chain than Israel is. Israel, in my opinion, doesn't have really the biggest experience fighting these big name guys yet. Not that he can't, because in those couple victories that he has won, he's proven it significantly so. I just think that Robert Whittaker is going to be too calm for this fight, and I do think that if he smells blood like Kelvin Gastelum did when he first rubbered him in the first round, I think Robert Whittaker won't let it go to waste and will outbox him and really put Israel Adesanya to rest. And I think the key to victory here is to close that gap. Don't let Israel Adesanya have any space. Make it more of a grappling match. You need to tire Israel Adesanya out big time so he can't let off his leg kicks and he can't let off his spinning elbows and all those fancy techniques that he loves to throw. Take that arsenal away from him, because he'll be useless without them. Maybe even take it to the ground. Robert Whittaker has very good wrestling and actually significantly well-honed jiu-jitsu, if I might say so myself, and maybe bring the fight there. Not necessarily to pull off a submission, but to pull off some serious ground and pound and get some scorecard points for you. I think he is taking this by unanimous decision on the judges' scorecard for sure. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. And I don't know if you noticed, but My hair's gone. Make sure to like, dislike, doesn't really matter. Leave a comment, positive, negative. Once again, it doesn't matter. Feedback is feedback. Thank you so much for tuning in, guys. I love you guys so much, and we are going to see you so soon. Well, when the next fights are, which is like literally next week. Love you guys. Peace.